Good evening. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to Table Talk with Dr. Sloan. Just wanted to say a couple of thank yous for those who made tonight possible, and then we'll get started with our guest speaker, and we'll have a little bit of Q&A followed by some dinner provided by Airmark. So I hope you enjoy yourself. We're really looking forward to tonight. Thanks for being here. Just real quick, there are a few people who were instrumental in making tonight possible. David Howe and the Husky Village RA staff did a wonderful job as the really got tonight going and really got a lot of people on board to make tonight happen. Those people who supported them, Airmark, a wonderful partner tonight, providing us a wonderful meal at a great rate, and they did a really good job decorating the tables for us, as well as David's staff. SGA are partners in this, as well as Career Services here at HBU, so we want to thank them for partnering with us. Really helped make tonight a success. And last but not least, Dr. Sloan, thank you for speaking for us. Just so you know, there is a CLW credit available, and we'll have somebody scanning for those after the event is concluded. Okay? So without further ado, let me get Whit Goodwin, the Director of Student Life, to come introduce our speaker.
So a CLW credit and dinner and hearing Dr. Sloan all for free. You should be paying to go to school here. That's all I know. Hey, well, welcome. We are very, very glad. Y'all thought that was funny, didn't you? Well, welcome. We are very glad that you are here. My name is Whit Goodwin. I'm the Director of Student Life here at HBU. And I would like to take just a quick moment to introduce Dr. Robert Sloan. Also, we do want to recognize really the engine behind Dr. Sloan, as with every good man, is his wife, Mrs. Sue Sloan, our First Lady. Dr. Sloan is going on 6 years here at HBU as president. During his time, many, many fantastic things have happened. We have new educational goals with the Liberal Arts Corps and continuing to strengthen the educational values that we have here in terms of medical and many other areas. We've also built many buildings here under Dr. Sloan's direction, including a wonderful residence hall and many other places for you to learn and for you to study. Dr. Sloan has a wealth of experience in many, many areas. He is a renowned New Testament theologian, which in itself could be enough, but he's also a fantastic preacher who has served in local churches, and he is obviously a businessman because he runs the day in and day out operations of HBU here and gives us leadership and guidance to become the university that God has called us to. So I do hope that you will really pay attention to what Dr. Sloan says, to take in his wisdom, and certainly prepare your questions for afterwards. And thank you for being here for this great time. And Dr. Sloan, thank you for coming to speak with us and sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you.
Whit, you're so kind. Thank you for that introduction. It's good to be here with all of you and to have this opportunity to share some thoughts. It's a really dangerous thing for a speaker to, thanks Mark, to be standing between you and your food. So that usually is a sign that it's good to have a relatively short set of remarks. So since I started off with about 35 minutes in my head, I'm going to do my best to compress a little bit because, but I want to give you time for some questions and some comments and that sort of thing. You look kind of nervous when I said 35 minutes, so I'll be a little briefer than that. But I do want you to ask me some questions because table talk, the whole idea is we're around the table and we get to talk. But of course, you also, maybe after our Q&A time, you get to talk with one another. So maybe somebody around each table could be designated as the official talk leader, okay? So, but our topic tonight has to do with vocation. And the idea of vocation is an enormously significant idea in the history of the Christian faith. It is a word that means, relates to the word calling. It comes from a Latin word, voco, vocare. We vocalize things. Your voice is also cognate, the word voice is cognate with that. But the idea is, is the idea of calling. Your vocation is that which you're supposed to do, that which you've been set apart to do, the kind of thing that you're uniquely made to do, the kind of thing that you're gifted at doing, the thing that you want to focus your energy and your time and your concerns upon, the thing that gives purpose to your life and to the lives of others around you. So those are the kinds of topics that we want to talk about a little bit. Now, what I want to start with is maybe a little bit different frame of reference. A lot of times when we talk about vocation, we just jump in there and start talking about your gifts and your interests, maybe what kind of score you had on, I don't know, a Myers-Briggs or something like that, or a strength finder. Are you an INTP or an ENTJ? And if you've ever had a Myers-Briggs, you know that kind of code and that sort of thing. And I think those things can be very helpful. I've Myers-Briggs several times in my life, and it's a really interesting and fascinating thing to do, and you learn a lot about yourself. But it's not just your personality inventory. It's not just your outlook and perspective that goes into the question of your vocation, your calling, what it is you're supposed to do, what it is that gives you purpose. In fact, there are bigger issues even than say what your major is. You know, when you come to a university, we often ask you, well, what's your major? What are you going to study? And so at a university, when we introduce ourselves, we always say our name and where we're from and what year we are, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, whatever, and then of course what your major or majors might be. And then of course the time you get to be a junior or senior, people will start asking, well, what are you going to do when you leave? So those are good questions, they're appropriate questions. They are related to the question of vocation, but they don't really completely absorb all the meaning that surrounds the idea of vocation. So what is it? What is it that I want us to talk about first of all before we talk about vocation? It is this. The idea of vocation in Scripture and in Jewish and Christian tradition has to do with the calling of God upon His people to accomplish certain things in the world. Now, the people of God are Israel in Scripture. And Israel is called or set apart, and they're supposed to do certain things in the world. They, as a group of people, not just individuals, and that's an important thing to appreciate when you start thinking about your vocation and your calling, and that is that really we're supposed to belong to a group of people, not that our individuality is snuffed out, but the significance of our lives is not completely absorbed by who we are individually, but it must also be understood in the context of who other people are. But the idea of Israel is set apart to be God's people in the world to accomplish a certain purpose. There is God has a plan, God has a story, God has a history that He is working out and trying to accomplish in human history, and He has Israel set aside to be His people. They are called. In fact, the very notion of Israel, the idea of the word church. Israel is in the Greek Old Testament, Israel is the ecclesia, the assembly, the called out ones. And in the New Testament, of course, the word church has as its Greek word the word ecclesia, and it comes from words that have to do with the idea of vocation, a calling. The Latin, we get our word vocation from the Latin word, as I said already, but the Greek word is kaleo, and the noun ecclesia, the called out assembly, the called out body of people. The Old Testament, that's Israel. New Testament is the church, who are to do the purposes of God in the world. So again, what is it that Israel is supposed to do? Israel is supposed to do the will of God. Israel is supposed to accomplish God's plan, God's purposes. Israel is part of God's story. So for any single Israelite to know what he or she was supposed to do, the first thing they have to realize is they're part of the group. They're part of the people of God. They've been called and set apart. And then, of course, for Israel as the people to realize what they're supposed to do, they have to know what God's story is. So first question is, what in the world is God doing? Or, the pun is intended, what in the world is God doing? And the biblical story is really, in some ways, it's a simple story. God has created. The creation is good. It has experienced the creation is fallen. There has been a human rebellion. The creatures were created good. The creation is neither the Jewish and Christian faith avoid two terrible errors about God. One terrible error about God is sort of like, it's like Epicureanism in the ancient world. The Epicureans are similar to what in modern day life might be called the deists. The Epicureans thought that if there is a God, he is very remote, and he's so remote that he has little or nothing to do with us. And in the modern day way of thinking about God, particularly since the Newtonian days of the Newtonian universe, it's sort of like, God is the big watchmaker. He's wound the watch up. He made everything, but he just sort of lets it tick, 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 tick. That's sort of deism. Thomas Jefferson was a deist, for example. But deism is that God, if he exists, is so distant and so removed that he doesn't have anything to do with us. So therefore, we just kind of, go on our own, figure things out as best we can, and as it were, do our own thing. The equal and opposite error to that is when you make God so close to the world, you make the mistake of the Stoics. Stoicism that virtually identifies the world with God, and it's sort of like pantheism. God's everything in the world is God, and the world is God, and you end up with all of the sort of offspring of that. The offshoot of that is sort of the silly kinds of things about sort of nature religions and fertility cults and all the really paganism is essentially religious forms, naturalism and spiritism and so on, religious forms that see God as close, too close to the world in some sense, so that God ultimately becomes identified with the world. But in Judaism and Christianity, God is the creator of the world. It's his world. He made it. He's not the same thing as the world, so it's not pantheism, but he loves the world. And he's involved with the world, and he cares about the world, and he made the creatures of the world. He made all the animals, and he made the human beings, and he put the human beings in charge of them. And Adam names the animals, and so God is intimately involved with this good creation. He loves the world. He's not He's not the God of Greek philosophy. He's not the God of the deists. He's not the God of the Epicureans. He's not the God of pantheism. He's not the God of the Stoics. He's the God in Scripture who creates, who shapes out of the dust of the ground the human beings. And from the man he makes a woman, and he breathes into them the breath of life. And they are made in his image, and they are supposed to have a kind of authority, a kind of stewardship over all of this gorgeous creation that God has made. And when God saw all that he had made, Scripture says, he saw that it was very good. God has a story going on here. And the way the story continues is that a catastrophe takes place. The human creatures rebel against him. But then God immediately sets in motion a plan to recover this world that is his world, that he loves, and the creatures that he loves. And so, even though the world is radically alienated from him to such an extent that at one point he almost destroys the world through a flood. We have the story of Noah and only his family and pairs of animals and so on. Groups of animals are saved. We have the story of the Tower of Babel, where the nations are scattered because they arrogantly try to build a tower to God. But God sets in motion a plan to rescue the world that he loves and the people that he loves. And so he calls Abraham. And Abraham, as we know, the way the story works out, is the first, as it were, Jew. And so Abraham, and then Abraham's son, Abraham is given a promise. And God says, through you, I will bless all the nations of the earth. The idea is, if you allow me to summarize it, not give you 1,000 details and all the footnotes that go with this, is that Abraham is going to, as it were, be the instrument of God so that God may put the world back to rights, so that God may restore the creation. And through Abraham, God makes this covenant promise that all the nations of the earth will be blessed through Abraham. But first, God must create a nation through Abraham. So there will be a people. Abraham will have a son, And from Abraham, he will raise up a great nation, and through this nation, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And so the idea is set in motion that takes up really the rest of Scripture until it brings us right down to the very point where we are today, because the Bible is a story that is waiting for its conclusion. So the story goes on. Abraham, and the covenant's renewed with Isaac, and then with Jacob, and then on Mount Sinai, after God brings all of Jacob's sons and all of the tribes out of Egyptian slavery, they go to Mount Sinai, and the covenant promise is renewed with them. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes, the nation Israel, they are to be the covenant people through whom God will restore the nations and bring the world that He loves and the people that He loves back to Himself, so that He can have a new heaven and a new earth, and He will have this transformation. So this is God's plan and this is God's story, but so far we've made progress in the story. In fact, the sad part of the story is that Israel, which is supposed to be the carriers of the plan and the purpose of God, they almost irretrievably fail. Almost. The story of Israel gets down to one faithful Israelite, the long-awaited Jewish Messiah. One day, the Scripture said, Isaiah, for example, and other places, that one day a son of David will appear and he will restore Israel. Israel had been disobedient, and Israel is virtually like the other nations and needs to be wiped out and judged, but a faithful Israelite emerges. And then the New Testament story tells us that the long-awaited son of David is none other than a boy, and then a man whose name is the namesake for Joshua, Yeshua, Jesus, the long-awaited Jewish Messiah. He's unlike virtually any other Davidic king, because he doesn't have the military might, he doesn't have the power. He tells his disciples to put up their swords when they try to fight on his behalf, and he seems to follow a strange plan. He dies. And now it looks like the story has come completely to an end and God's plan is absolutely over. But God then in Him begins this new creation. The new creation. He raises Him from the dead. And now the new heaven and the new earth, as it were, begins in a microcosm, in a small way. The one faithful Israelite who bore Israel's judgment and judgment of all the nations is the very point and location where God begins the new creation, the new Garden of Eden, the new people of God. And so we have His 12 followers who then, after He's raised from the dead, begin to believe in Him. And then it turns out there's 120, and then there are more than 500 who see Him alive at one time, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. And now we have down now for 2,000 years the church growing and expanding, often unfaithful, often itself, the church herself, guilty of terrible crimes and living unfaithfully to her own calling. But still, the church has managed to be preserved by the hand of the faithful God. And now, here's our story waiting for a conclusion. But you have to know the big story. You know, it's no good to recite the opening soliloquy to Richard III perfectly. You know, it starts off, "Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York." And he's sort of a hunchback guy, and he says that I who am not made to court an amorous looking glass. I'm not good looking, he says. Nor to caper nimbly in a lady's chamber. Doesn't have many girlfriends. I who am not made for sportive tricks. If I cannot prove a lover, I am determined to prove a villain. It's a beautiful, I love that soliloquy. Richard III is my favorite Shakespearean play, maybe. And you could know that part perfectly. But if you're supposed to be playing Macbeth, it doesn't really work if you walk onto the stage and recite the wrong soliloquy. You could say it beautifully. But if you don't know the big story, the big plot where you're supposed to carry out your part, you'll miss it. Or, you know, if suddenly the woodsman comes in, the woodsman who saves Little Red Riding Hood rushes in and tries to save the 3 little pigs, our character is out of place here. So the big story is that God is working to bring the world back to himself through the long-awaited Son of God, the true King, Jesus, the long-awaited Messiah who's also King of the world. So you've got to find your spot in the big story, and that comes by identification, following Jesus. The next thing is that you have to find your spot in the, you might say, the microcosm story, that is, of God's people. And this is where say, again, there are a lot of details to give you here, but in the Gospel of John, in John, you get, after the resurrection of Jesus, John has a lot of symbolic phraseology. He uses a lot with light and darkness. For example, in the Gospel of John, when Judas was just about to betray Jesus, and it was the Last Supper, this is in the Gospel of John, and we read that Jesus took a morsel and he dipped it, and Peter has said, Lord, who is it who's going to betray you? And Jesus whispers back, it is the one for whom when after I dip the morsel, I'll give it to him. And the Gospel of John says, and he dipped the morsel and handed it to Judas. And then Jesus says, what you do quickly. And some, John tells us, thinking that he had charge of the money box and was supposed to either give something to the poor or buy something else that they had need of for the feast, the Passover, saw him go out. They didn't know why he was leaving, but Jesus, of course, knew. And then John, the narrator, in the Gospel, he says, and it was night. Well, it's the powers of darkness. Yes, it was really night, but it's also the powers of darkness. John uses a lot of symbolism with light and darkness. After the resurrection of Jesus, we're told in John 20, early in the morning on the first day. Well, Jesus is put to death, you might say, on day 6. 7 days of creation. He's put to death on day 6, which is really after sundown on Thursday, which is really Friday. And then the 7th day is the day of rest. He's in the tomb. But the 8th day, or the first day of the next week, is the day of the new creation. And John, twice in John chapter 20, says, on the morning of the first day of the week. Twice mentions the first day of the week. The first time very early on the first day, and that's when Mary goes into the garden and doesn't recognize Jesus at first and thinks he's the gardener. He says, where have they put his body? And then he says, Mary. And she recognizes him, and then on that same day, but it's in the evening, it says, on the evening of the first day. John twice tells us it's the first day. Jesus appears to his disciples. That's the time when he appears to them, and that's when he says to them, as the Father has sent me, later on in the text, so send I you. And he breathed on them. Remember what God did after he made Adam, Eve, makes Adam? He breathes onto him the breath of life. Jesus breathes on his followers. It's the new creation. It's like receiving the gift of the Spirit. It's like a Pentecost. They receive the Spirit. It's the new creation. As the Father has sent me, so send I you. So the next, first is the question of what's God's story. Then it's the question of, well, where are we in the story? Well, we're part of the people of God. We're supposed to be doing the mission that God gave Jesus to do, which is, of course, this mission of being part of transforming the world so that it will be conformed to the will and purposes of God. It's only, I think, then when you know God's big story and then the story of our mission, as the Father has sent me, so send I you, said Jesus. Only when you know that we've been empowered, now you can start to ask the question, what are my gifts? What is my calling? What are my interests? Where do I fit in the play, in the plot, in the storyline? You belong under the lordship of God revealed through Jesus Christ. You belong as part of God's friends, the people of God who likewise worship Jesus Christ. And you belong, and you have a niche within that body. Paul goes on to say that there are many members of the body of Christ. Though having many members, we all join together to be part of the one body, but we have different gifts and different ministries. And now the question of your own, as it were, individual giftedness. Because remember, you could beautifully recite the opening soliloquy to Richard III. Just don't do it if you're supposed to be doing Macbeth. You could do a beautiful job of whatever it is you think interests are, but if you don't tie yourself into the big story, you'll miss it. But now, what is it? I'll just ask you a few questions. What is it, yes, that you have a deep interest in? What is it that causes you in the morning to really want to get up and do something? What is it that you're willing to work hard at? You know, if you say you want to be a concert pianist, but you're not willing to practice 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day for about 15 years just to get started, that's not what you're going to do. Or if you want to be a translator into Chinese, don't expect to just fly over to Beijing and get off the plane and be really enthusiastic and expect your enthusiasm to help you speak Chinese. You'll have to work really hard at it. What are you willing to work hard at? What are your interest levels? What are those things that motivate you? And what are the things that seem to fit within God's people and then within God's plan? There are all kinds of things we can do, and the way we find out who we are and the way we find out what we do best is really by doing. I love taking those kinds of inventories and those kinds of tests. As I said, I've done plenty of those in my life. Interesting thing about the Myers-Briggs is that I remember mine sort of changed, and it does. Your interests can change. Your experiences. We're not just sort of set for life with a certain static way of being, and then you're forever stuck there. No, you can change. Your behavior, our behaviors, our practices, the things that we learn about, the things that we do constantly shape us. There's a lot of physiology neurophysiology that talks about this, the production of myelin. The more you practice something, these little bands go around your nerves. And, these men and women who can hit a golf ball the same way 1,000 times over and over, or a pitcher who can throw a ball, didn't just wake up one morning to do that, or the piano player who could never quite put these two parts together, but one day can, after thousands of hours of practice, becomes a concert pianist. Those things happen because of repetition, and because we learn, and because both spiritually and psychologically and physically, all these things sort of come together. So I think learning from your friends, who you are, is a good thing. Learning from Scripture, learning in worship, learning by doing, learning to discover what is it that you have a passion for, what is it you're willing to work hard at, what is it you really love doing. All of those are ways to find out what your own specific individual calling is under God. It's an exciting thing. It's a wonderful thing to test out. And I have to tell you, as life goes on for me, I still ask myself some of the same questions I've been asking myself, for a long time, since your age and younger. I wonder what I'm supposed to do. You say, well, you're supposed to do what you're doing. Well, yeah, but what about tomorrow? What about a year from now? What about 5 years or 10 years from now? Of course, none of us has a guarantee that we'll be alive, 30 minutes from now. But we can still seek to be faithful where we are and always be open to the future that God gives us. Well, let me see if there's anything you want to talk about, or I know you're bound to be getting hungry by now, but maybe we could talk a little bit if you've got some thoughts.
Great. Well, thank you so much, President Sloan, for taking time to be here. for your presentation, and of course, just overall for your great leadership of this university. So,
Thanks,
ladies and
David.
gentlemen, if you could just join me in thanking President Sloan.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
Thanks. Thank you.
We do have about 15 minutes for Q&A, and we just respectfully request that you limit your questions to the topic of vocation. And so I'll take questions. I'll kind of be floating around. If you'll raise your hand, and before you ask a question, please just state your name and speak loudly into the mic. So, whichever hand I first see, that's where I'll go.
See, David and I aren't going to give up. We're just going to wait, right, David?
I'm pretty comfortable with this silence, so yes.
Yeah, I do too.
The food must be really good. Well,
I know,
there we go.
you go.
Thank you, Danielle.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
All right, how do you pinpoint which vocation to choose if you're passionate about many things?
Yeah. I think you discover that one of the best ways is by doing. What happens is as you continue to do something, you'll develop great skill at it, or you'll see that your interests diverge. It's really in the doing of it. I look back a lot on my life and think, I remember telling somebody just recently who was college age, and we were talking about what to do. And when I look back, I look back and say, well, I couldn't have done anything else but study theology and be a professor and then end up being an administrator. But I remember distinctly when I was an undergraduate, I couldn't figure out what to major in. I took 2 years before I was an undecided forever. And then I started off with a psychology major and then added a theology major to that. And then as I was leaving the university, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, but I really didn't know. I sort of thought I was going to go do a PhD in psychology. Well, that would have been a good thing to do, and I had the major for it. But my point is that what seems like, when you're younger, you have so many options open. And that is one of the challenges and one of the difficulties. You have a lot of options open. But every time you make one decision, it opens a lot of other doors and it'll close some other ones. Now, it's not to say you can't say, 2 years later, well, I made a mistake, I'm going to go back and do the other thing. But my thought is, it is by doing. Of course, you need friends, you need prayer, you need scripture, you need worship, you need all those other things. But the really practical thing of doing it, just try something out and see how it feels, how it works, and if your energy is there. If you don't like something, that's not a good sign. Really, because if something is just drudgery and you just hate it, that's really not a good sign. Now, there are times, though, when there are certain things we have to do a lot of drudgery to get to something that's related to the drudgery. Memorizing a lot of Greek or Latin verbs or German verbs, I've done a lot of that in my life, or Spanish verbs. That can be very hard in vocabulary, but you're trying to get to the joy of being able to read the literature and talk to somebody in another language and that sort of thing. So there's some, just because something's not easy doesn't mean it, it isn't the direction to go. In the book of Hebrews, it says, Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross and despised the shame. So there are times when you just have to, tough it out. But just the doing of it, I think, is the best way.
Hello, I'm Sierra.
Hi, Sierra.
How did you know that theology was your calling? How did you come about going towards that path?
I don't quite know how to answer that. I had a sense, even when I was a very little boy, that I was supposed to do something related to the church. And it was a sense that God wanted me to be a preacher. And so, even when I was a little boy. And so, I really wanted to do something else, but I had this sort of nagging feeling. So I knew that I had to just keep trying that. So I knew that I had to prepare to do that if that's what I was supposed to do. So it was sort of like my answer to this. On the one hand, I wanted to do something else, which was sports related. And so I spent a lot of time doing sports related things. But I kept having this nagging sense that I was supposed to do something else. And then, you know, as life went on, feedback from other people, affirmation, interest level, and all those things, that's what led me to theology. I mean, I had a sense of calling from God that I was supposed to be a preacher, and that got reaffirmed at different points in my life. And at times it was just an unusual experience, but other times it was just by studying a lot, I got the affirmation that, hey, you know, I kept getting pulled along. I hope that helps. Kind of a short answer, or a dull answer, I'm not sure which.
Hello, I'm Vincent. How important do you think it is in finding direction and vocation to have a sort of leader or a mentor to guide you along your path?
I think that's really important. Now, we use the word mentors a lot. That's kind of a buzzword about the last, 20 years or so. And I think it's a good one because mentor, it sort of appeals to the old apprentice system. And that's the way people tended to learn trades. They tended to learn them from parents. You know, a father would teach you. One of the old rabbinic mandates, tractate said that a father must teach his son a trade. And of course, the girls were taught by their mothers how to do household and domestic things. And so, obviously, we don't divide life up quite the same way. But the idea that parents did a lot of that mentoring and guiding, I think it's a great thing. Now, our world's very different. Our families are not quite as intact in a lot of places as they used to be. Where you do come from an intact, I-N-T-A-C-T, held together, cohesive family, then take advantage of learning from mom and from dad, from grandparents. It's an important thing. But it's also important. I mean, I learned a lot from neighbors and Sunday school teachers and school teachers. I think nowadays it's a tougher challenge for young women and young men because the temptation is to hang out only with your friends, and we know that young people sort of whether they either get in gangs or just sort of groups of friends, that's something we do. It's very dangerous if you lose contact with other generations, though. You lose a lot. A church, for example, but this is true of any organization, that only has sort of a youth mentality or only has a senior citizen mentality. That's a dangerous thing. The family is a generational thing, and we all have something to learn from one another. So you can replicate that in your own experience. So, a professor, a staff member, a person in business. If you wanted to be, study law, then try to find a couple of lawyers around town and go talk to them and say, hey, would you have lunch with me and let me pick your brain for a while? Or I know a son-in-law of mine was always interested. His dad was in construction, and so he loved construction. He grew up with it, and he loved the law, so he went into construction law. But he talked to a lot of attorneys who did construction law. So yeah, I mean, find somebody and just kind of hang out around them a little bit. And you should always, internships are a great thing to do. Don't look in our economy today. If you'll go work for free for somebody, you can probably get a job. But just say, hey, I'll work hard. Could I work for you, 10 hours a week or something, and you don't have to pay me anything. And it's a little bit of a risk, but one, you'll learn a ton of things. And if you work hard, I promise you, more than half the time they'll want to keep you. But yeah, I love the idea of mentoring. It's really good, particularly where families have struggled, and we need that intergenerational help.
Great, and then one last question. I saw a hand over here.
Hi, I'm Kate. I feel like there's a lot of good things that you can do with your life. And how do you know when what you're doing is in line with what God wants you to do?
Is that what you asked me? How do you?
Well, whenever you pick something, because there's so many good things that you can do with your life,
Yeah.
Different professions.
Yeah.
A lot of things are good. how do you know when you've picked one? How do you know that that's in line with what God really wants you to do?
Yeah. That's a hard one. My first answer is that individually it feels very affirming. There's a sense of, well, I just kind of know that. And that counts for real knowledge. I mean, I just kind of sense it. I know it. This is really what I should do. The only danger there is, though, we can't claim, we need the affirmation of others, though. I think it's a combination of, do you feel good about it? Are you getting affirmation from others to kind of, be a check to you? In 1 Corinthians 14, Paul says, he's talking about prophets and order in the church. He says, let 2 or at the most 3 prophets speak. So here's the prophet who's got a word from God, and he or she's going to say it, because they had women prophets in Corinth too. He or she's going to say it. But then Paul says an unusual phrase, let 2 or at the most 3 prophets speak, and then the next phrase is, and let the others decide. Decide what? Well, whether it was a good prophecy or not. So just because you think you have, you're sure of something, it's still a good idea to let other people sort of test it against that of other people. So that's my first thought. There is a sense of affirmation, fulfillment, your gifts are being used. If it's something that allows you to use your gifts and be honest and transparent, if you have to hide yourself, and I've been in jobs like that before, or circumstances where I thought, I'm doing my best to relate to this group, but if they really knew what I really think and who I really am, I'm not sure I'd get along too well here. And so when you're in a situation that allows you to express who you are, to be who you are, to tell the truth, to work hard, to express your giftedness, that's a really strong indicator, and you get good feedback. Now, the only little caution I want to place on that is this. Feeling good and being happy are not the ultimate criterion, because there are times, the vocation of Jesus, there's a lot of evidence that he said things like this, that he came to do the will of him who sent him. He knew what the Father wanted him to do. He had the affirmation of Scripture and so on. But a lot of people didn't like Jesus. Matter of fact, they killed him. So social acceptance is not the full criterion. So there are times when we have trouble, we have opposition, and you just have to still do what you deep down believe is right. So I've never liked always saying that, well, I just feel good about this. Sometimes our feelings can deceive us. And well, I feel good about this is, in other words, this is just what I really wanted to do. And it might be something selfish. That's why we need to check ourselves against Scripture, against the church, against friends, and try to measure it out. So that's my best stab at answering that, which is the toughest question for all of us. I've had many times in life. In fact, I'll give you. Right now, Sue and I have grandchildren, and we love being around our grandchildren. And so it's very natural for me to think, well, we could go live near them, and maybe I could play some golf and so on. Or we could do X, Y, Z. Houston's a big city and it's crowded. But I have a deep sense of calling. So just because it might be fun to go do something else, and I love the way you put it. There are a lot of good things you can do. Yeah, it'd be a good thing to go be with grandchildren and all that. But I have a sense of calling, and you can't let that go. So I think we always have those kinds of struggles. David, I think my answers are a little too long here, and so. Well, I wish I had time to talk to each one of you and hash over these things, but these are the kinds of questions that really don't expect to be done with it once for all in your life. Just when you think you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, the Lord may stir you up a little bit. We're supposed to be a pilgrim people. We are aliens and sojourners here, and we're on a pilgrimage. We're on a journey. We're part of a dynamic plot and a dynamic story, and so God can be the God of surprises and do a new thing in our lives. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Dr. Sloan. Thank you very much. One quick announcement. I believe David's going to have an announcement after this, but many of the things Dr. Sloan talked about hit home with me, and I know they hit home with you. There are many resources for you here at HBU to really explore vocations, explore who you are in terms of personality, in terms of interests, Myers-Briggs, Strengths Finders, all of these inventories that'll really help you learn a little bit more about who you are, and then a little bit more about what you may be called to do. So please drop by the Career Center. Probably the best place to drop by is my office in Student Life. We'll make sure you get connected with those inventories or with people who can help you with resumes or talk about jobs or vocations and the studies that would go best with that. Please use us as a resource, because we're here not only to help you academically so you learn, but we're here to help your mind, your soul, your spirit, and we're here to help you get a job for when you graduate and have an internship while you're in school, which is a wonderful opportunity to gain experience. So please check out the Career Center, check out Hire a Husky online, where you can find many jobs and internships we have available, and they're available in Houston. And please use us as a resource to help you continue to figure out what God is calling you to do in terms of vocation.
Thanks, guys. Just a couple of quick announcements. Kind of piggybacking on what Mr. Goodwin was saying, we hope this is a springboard to begin and continue the conversation regarding vocation. Even tonight, at your tables, feel free to discuss what God's put on your heart and beyond. Just really explore that. What gifts has He given you? What passions has given you? And how can we turn that into something that glorifies the kingdom? So the announcements I had were, you have these little packets on your tables, and they have a cute little bow on them. And so at some point before you leave, these are assessment pieces. This is how we really figure out whether or not you guys enjoyed events like this, and where to really put and allocate our money for programming. So please, before you leave, fill one of these out. There should be pens available at each table as well. And finally, as far as food, what we're going to do is after I'm going to have Vincent pray for us. We're going to go outside, we're going to pray, or we're going to eat, and then the gentlemen, if you will be gentlemen, and allow at least the women at your tables to please get the food first and go from there. And so from that, before we do that, this event was brought to you by Residence Life and SGA, and I thought it'd be really fitting if the president of SGA, Vincent Myers, led us in prayer.
Lord, thank you for the chance to come together tonight and talk and fellowship and learn more about who we are and about who you are, and in a more meaningful way know how those two go together. Thank you for our president, Dr. Sloan, and for the vision and leadership he's providing. And thank you especially for the food we're about to eat. And please bless it to our body's strength and health. In Jesus' name, amen.